So in this video I'm gonna talk about why the 5 points of architecture, how Le Corbusier called it, are nonsense. So in the meaning they're either not new or they don't make too much sense. So this is a sketch from Le Corbusier from the book Vers une architecture from 1923, where he presented the 5 points of architecture in a book before they were separately presented in texts that he published. But in the book Vers une architecture, he explained them thoroughly. And here I wrote the terms on the left side myself, on the right side sketches from Le Corbusier. So I will go through these 5 points in this video step by step and explain why they're either not new or they don't really make too much sense. So a critical view on that. So that's Le Corbusier, how we know him, right? The famous look that he has. And this is a picture when he was younger, probably around the time when he published that book, 1923. So in the first fact that some of you might know, but that's not what this video is about, that actually they were not really from him. So the ideas were already there before. And they were published 1917 in that book, Cité industrielle, Une Cité industrielle, that means industrial city, from Tony Garnier. And this guy didn't become famous with that at all. So he invented these thoughts already around 1900, Tony Garnier, and then published it 1917 in this book. And this is Tony Garnier. And that guy didn't become famous with that at all. But these 5 points, or the content of it, this is how the city industrielle should look like, funny, no? Already included in this book, and Le Corbusier kind of extracted from there and published it under his authorship. So, but that's not what this video is about. So it's we can also say, like, Le Corbusier was definitely better in marketing to display it like that. Like on the right side, you see the old, the overcome system, on the left, the new, and like with these clear sketches. So one of the strengths of Le Corbusier, besides I still think he was a good architect and a remarkable visionary, but besides that, one of his strengths is clearly that he was very good in marketing and also self-marketing, right? How he show himself everywhere with a hat and the fly. But he was really good in marketing. That means he took this idea and like displayed it like so clearly that everyone can understand it, right? So that's one of his strengths. And this is also the classic tale of the modern time, same like the Bauhaus, right? Although Le Corbusier was never part of the Bauhaus. So the old system on the right side, let's say the overcome system, these people, let's say before modern times, they just didn't know it better. So the dumb guys, and then the new system on the left. So that's like everyone understand that. That's also the tale or the story of the Bauhaus, right? This Hollywood tale, like the good and the bad, or here in case the dump and then the new system. So and these 5 points are most clearly displayed in this building, right? The famous Villa Savoye in Poissy, west of Paris. And this is the ideal, like, a translation of these theoretical 5 points into a building. This is from 1929. And here it's written again how they are applied, right? The roof garden, of course, on top, the free facade of the design, which in this case includes the horizontal windows, and then the free plan, and the main elements are the support. So he called it like pilotis in French, basically the columns. So and now we go through these 5 points step by step. And actually the first 3 are already like in one group, because it all comes down to the pilotis, so the column, the grid, the columns that are arranged in a grid. And the point 2, the free ground plan, basically means that the walls, in this case the inner walls, are not supporting, so you can arrange them freely around the columns because the columns are there. And then the free facade is basically kind of a curtain wall, which is also due to the columns or pilotis that support the loads. So these 3 are kind of, you can see together. And the following slides I took from a lecture I gave in university about construction. So you can see that this is actually not new. So here I put this beautiful cave on the left side that should represent like any kind of cave. Because you see, even in the very, very early settlements of human, we have this kind of 2, let's say, ways to bring the load down. So we have on the one hand the massive or solid construction, and on the other hand the frame construction. And as you can see, so the caves, I mean, human found them, right? We didn't build the caves, but they are like massive. So the wall and the ceiling and the walls are like massive or load bearing. And then, as you can see on the right side, the tent is basically the early origin of a frame construction already. So what Le Corbusier does actually, he on this side, on the right side, he shows basically a massive wall construction opposed to the new frame construction. It's basically a frame construction. And as I will show in this video here, they exist already for a long time in wood. So now he used steel concrete in the Villa Savoye, and it's mainly the steel that make it possible that these columns are so thin. But actually the system exists like for thousands of years, and then in the system of wood. So as you see here, the early settlements on the left, the cave is the archetype of a massive construction, although these caves were found by human and not built. But then on the right side, you see the early tent. So that basically started, I guess, like that human just put a fur, so an animal fur over like branches from a tree. So that they used the tree as a frame and then hang the fur over it. So it's the early origin of a frame construction. And here are the developments then. On these are both reconstructions, so they are new building on this picture. But on the left side, you see a reconstruction of an early round house from clay. First it was clay, and later the clay was sun-dried, which is called adobe. And then these adobes were baked in the oven, and which is then become the brick. So the brick house is a development from the clay house, and at the beginning they were roundish. So in this left reconstruction, you can see imagination how probably the early houses looked like. That means the massive construction means that the load from the ceiling bring down to the ground via the wall. So the wall is load bearing. So, and then on the other hand, we always had, as you can see in these beautiful holiday houses, we always have frame construction. So in this case, in the following slides, you see more example. You see like nowadays, we still have it in Southeast Asia in the so-called pile dwelling. So that means here you have two, again, contemporary examples, but these were like 100-year-old traditions of like wooden houses, and they are frame construction. That's basically the principle of the Villa Savoye. So technically, you could build the Villa Savoye in wood. You just need to make all dimensions a bit thicker, because wood cannot take so many loads as steel or steel concrete. But the system is the same. So what he basically does in his 5 points, he opposed the massive construction, which, as I said, always existed, to the frame construction, which exists for a very long time. And as you can see here, Southeast Asian pile dwellings still do it nowadays. It was bamboo before, and you basically erect a grid in bamboo, and then there are gaps in between, and you fill them with something, probably also like light bamboos in another way, or nowadays it's wood, but it's the separation of of the load-bearing elements, in this case columns and beams, in this case in wood, and the room separating elements, so inner walls and outer walls. So, and technically you could have also made huge glass windows in these houses, because the walls, as I said, are not load bearing. The load from the roof is bring down to the ground via beams and columns, and this is a so-called frame construction or light construction, and this exists for hundreds and thousands of years. So it's nothing new that he displayed there. He just like worked it out so clearly and translated it very clear in this Villa Savoye. But the system, I mean, Southeast Asian pile dwellings, and as you see on the right side, they also like usually lifted over the ground. So this one is over the water, but nowadays in Thailand they even build them new, so they are still like 2 or 3 meters over the ground, as they always were, and they use the space under the house as a storage or for the chicken or something. So they were always like lifted over the ground, as the Villa Savoye is. So, and here you see like I put, for contemporary examples of these two construction principles, high rises, because it's like a very we didn't have high rises in the past, right? But still, you can see the famous Kohlhoff Tower in Berlin from Hans Kohlhoff, the former headquarter of Mercedes-Benz. And here the outside walls are load bearing. So that means there's a steel construction facade covered with bricks, which is like load bearing. That means the wall indeed brings the forces from the ceilings down in the ground. On the right side, I put this famous bank building from Norman Foster, because here the frame construction is on the outside. Nowadays, most of the high rises, and I think all high rises in the USA, are frame construction. That means you erect, in the Le Corbusier principle, columns, and you have beams, which bring the forces into the ground, and then all facades are usually curtain walls, and inner walls are like, can be arranged freely because they're not load bearing. So that's the principle of the 5 points. And I put this Norman Foster building because in this case the frame is outside and visible. Most of the skyscrapers, as you know, have the frame system inside, so you just see a glass facade mostly. But it's the same principle. And here you see on the material overview, on the left side, so these are all new buildings, right? On the left side, Louis Kahn. It's just, I think, the perfect form of brick architecture. It's from 1970s, and bricks are, an example of massed or solid construction because they cannot take pulling forces. So will lead too far now, but it's about pulling and pushing forces. So massive construction can bring the forces down via pushing forces, and wood can absorb both. So, but wooden constructions are usually always frame construction. So on the right side, this Thailand house, again, a new one, but it has been for hundreds of years there, frame construction in wood, principle of Villa Savoye as well. And on the bottom, you see concrete on the left, because the Romans even knew concrete, but they didn't know iron or steel. So in that time, the concrete was only possible for massive construction. That means you could only bring the forces down via volume, which absorb pushing forces and no pulling forces. Adding the iron in the 19th century and the steel in the 20th century, it made it possible to create steel concrete. So steel concrete is the perfect material where you can create everything out of it because you can absorb pushing and pulling forces. And by that moment, so in architecture we call it moment. On the right side, example of a simple steel hall, industrial building, so only steel. But as you can see, light and frame constructions, nowadays steel or steel concrete, as in the Villa Savoye, existed in wooden constructions for hundreds of years, so nothing new. And here these beautiful pictures I put because this is the famous, or one of the famous Unités d'habitation from Le Corbusier, right? He built several ones from 1950s onwards, and they all look kind of the same. And I put this example because he insisted to use these 5 points, even, let's say, in his late works after Second World War, although he also created buildings, which I show later, which do not include these 5 points, but wherever he can, he used them. And in my opinion, it doesn't make too much sense often. So in this Unité, you see this huge, massive apartment house block, and he lifted it over the ground with these pilotis. And I mean, I've been there. It's like the space under it is completely not useful because you have this heavy house over you, which is scary, and these pilotis also become very thick, as you can see, because it lifts up this whole thousands of tons heavy building. And usually the space is also not used for anything. It's just this principle, we lift up the building, but I mean, my question is for what? So usually the space is just empty and unused in the Unité, I mean, and specifically these buildings, or they use it as a car park, but car park you could have put under the ground as well, right? So, but he insisted on using it. And here, this is a picture from a contemporary Japanese house where they also related to these 5 points. And you see how beautiful that space is. I mean, you want to use it. I mean, Le Corbusier said the garden will continue under the house. But I mean, for a garden, it's a bit too dark, isn't it? So this lifting up of the house, in my opinion, it doesn't make too much sense. And this is this famous monastery in France, La Tourette. I've been there too. I mean, it's a great and fascinating building, which is worth another lecture. But here he also insisted of using these pillars or pilotis to lift up the whole building. And in this case, I think it really does not make sense, because you see on the left side of this picture, on the very bottom, is the dining room. And this one is like 30 or 40 centimeters over the ground and has no door to the outside, so no connection. So, I mean, this space, 30 or 40 centimeters over the ground, for sure you can't use it. And I think it would be much more appealing to have a connection to the outside. So, I mean, you can go out and use the landscape or the garden from the dining room, right? And on this photo, you see that there's a courtyard inside. And the courtyard is really nearly not usable. Here you can look in it a bit because it's on a slopey hill and it's accessible. But I mean, it's a slopey hill and it doesn't make any sense. So this lifting up of the building with these pilotis, I think in this monastery it like really does not make any sense in my opinion. So a connection with the ground would have made that you can the building can interact with its landscape, but in this case it's really like standing over it. So he insisted of using it, but yeah, it doesn't make too much sense specifically in this building, in my opinion. Nevertheless, it's a great building. Yeah, and the next point is even more ridiculous, the roof garden. And that makes me a bit angry because also that's not something new. So here you have again this modern architecture tale on the right side, the stupid old system. The guys didn't know it better. And on the left, the new intelligent modernity, right? So we make a flat roof and basically can use the space on the house as a roof garden. But that's also not new. So when you look on the very early settlement, so this is a reconstruction in 3D from Jericho, which was the first known city or city kind of settlement ever, around 9,000 before Christ in where is today Israel. And you see on this reconstruction, flat roofs, because so, and this is a picture from the same area, Israel nowadays. This is Jerusalem. And what do you see? Flat roofs, because in that area it doesn't rain a lot. So even the very first settlements, people built flat roofs and used them as terraces, same in the Villa Savoye. So it's nothing new. It's the very first settlements. And it makes sense in this area because it doesn't rain a lot there. When you go a bit more northern, so this is Turkey. And what you see? Flat roofs again. And it has been there like that traditionally for thousands of years because it doesn't rain a lot. And if you go a bit more northern, that's Italy, you have slightly steep roofs because these gable roofs, because it rains in Italy a bit more than in Turkey. So you make slightly steep roofs. And if you go northern Europe, where it's, by the way, also the Villa Savoye located, so that's Germany, these typical gable roofs. But also Paris has quite a lot of rain compared to Turkey or Israel. So that means, I mention Israel because the first settlement, Jericho, is located there. So in Villa Savoye, there's a lot of rain. That's why houses traditionally had these kinds of roofs, same as in Germany. And tada, also the Villa Savoye, it rained inside. I mean, they could never fix the roof. So the rain was dripping in the bedroom until now. So it's like flat roofs doesn't make too much sense in rainy areas, in my opinion. So, but it's nothing new. Even the first settlements had flat roofs. So it's like, it's a regional thing, but but he presented it something totally new. And then the last point is the most ridiculous because it's these horizontal windows. So, I mean, logically, this is a sketch again from the same book, Version Architecture from 1923, drawn by Le Corbusier. And on the top side, you see again the curtain wall. So if you have a curtain wall, you can kind of do in the facade whatever you want. And technically also the Southeast Asian pile building in wood, you could have erected with such a facade. By the way, the new thing of the Villa Savoye is that they put the facade and also the interior walls in different layers than the column grid. But that doesn't make too much sense also because then you have the the columns in the way all the time inside. So you run against them. So in the Southeast Asian house, they usually fill the gap between the columns, which is the natural, I think, intuition because, you just fill them, but still you could move them wherever you want. So Villa Savoye separates also the position of inside wall and this curtain wall, which has the effect that you have the columns in your living room. But nevertheless, of course, you can design the facade however you want if the columns or the Southeast Asian bamboo trees, which bring down the loads in the frame construction, are load bearing. So on the left side, he said, then we can also do horizontal windows. I mean, you can, fine. But what he draws there on the bottom is simply wrong. So on the bottom of this page, that should be a floor plan. And every architect student who took just one lecture or one seminar in light design knows that what he draws is wrong. So, and he's known to be the most remarkable architect in 20th century, and he was a good architect, but the sketch is still wrong. So on the right side, the old system, he says these vertical windows basically create a dark room. He illustrated by 4 zones. And then the new window on the left creates a very bright room, right? That's why he draw like 2 zones, but that's from his book. It was his sketches by Le Corbusier in 1923. But it's nonsense because every architecture student who took, as I said, one seminar on light design knows that the position of the upper beam determines how deep the light goes into the room. And it's also like logical. So if the height of the upper beam of a window, let's say in both cases, let's say 2.50 meters, then the depth of the light in the room in both cases is exactly the same. So of course, if you make the window wider, as on the left side, the width of the light is more. So you have more light in the room with a wider window, but it doesn't bring the light deeper into the room as you illustrate on the floor plans on the ground. So the depth in the room will be the same, and it depends on the, as I said, on the height of the upper beam of the window and not of the width. So the width determines the width of the light in the room, and by that also the maximum amount. And I mean, you have this throughout history as well. I mean, for example, in Baroque time in 17th, 18th century, especially in 18th century, there was a time where it was fashion to make large windows. So there are many Baroque palaces and which have very large windows because it was that fashion at the time. And of course, they have more light in the room. And then in another period, in people wanted like more privacy, so they make smaller windows again. So, as I said, the sketch on the bottom is simply wrong. The position of the upper beam determines the depth of the light in the room, and not what he draws here. It's simply wrong. So, nevertheless, I think, as I said, he was a remarkable architect. And this house I want to show, that's the Villa Gage. Villa Stein in Gage, which is now also part of Paris, already in the west of Paris. And that's from, I think, 1920, 05 or 7, no, I forgot. Just after he published these points, and these 5 points of a new architecture, how he called it. And it's a remarkable building. So my thesis is a bit, Le Corbusier was a great architect despite of the theory he used and not because of it. So he was very good in marketing, and for sure he became famous also with these 5 points and how he presented, as I said, and obviously better than Tony Garnier, because nobody knows Tony Garnier, although he invented it and had the same thoughts already earlier. But so one of the strengths of Le Corbusier is his self-marketing and marketing, and I think he was a great and remarkable architect, but more despite of this theory and not because of it. So here's the front, and on the back you see he just make larger windows. And again, this lifting up of the building. So here's even something under the, I mean, there's no free space under the building, but also I feel like if you make a connection to the garden, it would make more sense these closed windows. So there's no relationship between the house and the garden, really. It's just a stair going down, right? So I think he could have connected his buildings more to the surrounding, in my opinion. But also the floor plans are great. You should take a look. The Villa Stein and Gage. I mean, it's very interesting. And here in the end, as I said before, he kept on using these 5 points wherever he can. Also like in India, for example, in Chandigarh buildings, but not all of them. So this is this famous, very sculptural church in France, La Ronchamp. And this is just a very sculptural building, right, where he plays a lot, or he works where he works a lot with the light. So these 5 points are not applied at all, so right. So it's just a very sculptural building. So he didn't use them in all buildings. That's from his late works, right? And also this one is this famous moduleur. I think I will make another video about that. So this is another example of a theory which, if you understand it, really does not work. So this thing, sorry, it does not make any sense, or not much sense, but I will make another video about that. So the moduleur also does not work, simply. And it's again an example where I think Le Corbusier was a great architect, despite of his theories, but not so much because of it.